My name is Winter Harms, and I am a sophomore here at State Fair. I am currently going for my chemistry degree, and I need general biology to get that degree, so I'm in this class. And today I'm going to be talking about The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. And the reason why I chose this book was because I have always been very interested in how science works at a cellular level, especially in cells that are cancerous. And this book has both of those. And the fact that it came from a woman of color is a bonus. So there's a lot of reasons for me to like this book. The book is broken into 3 parts, so it's a bit easier to read. It's broken down into different timelines. The first part is a backstory of Henrietta, who she was as a person. She was a wife to David Lacks. That was her first cousin. They had 5 children, and they moved to Maryland and lived around the Baltimore area. And the second part details how she died and how HeLa cells came to be, and a lot of the medical and scientific advancements that came along with having HeLa cells. And the third part actually details the family's response to realizing that the cells are still in existence. So they weren't aware that the cells existed in the first place, and when all those scientific advancements were made using Henrietta's cells, none of the family was notified. So it's a bit of a shock thinking that your loved one's dead and a part of them is still living and being kept alive in a lab. I do have a part of the book that is there's a moment that they have that I thoroughly enjoyed, and it is when Henrietta's 2 youngest children and Rebecca go to the lab of Christoph Lingbauer, and they're allowed to look at Henrietta's cells under a microscope. So all of those years of being told, hey, your mother's cells are special, and this is what they do, and they didn't quite understand that. They actually got to see those cells under a microscope, and Christoph had actually painted them with fluorescence, and so they could see them lit up, and I think that was really special. He gave them a framed picture of Henrietta's cells that had been stained with fluorescence from his research. And this book does have a few major impacts for science. It actually was discovered that Henrietta's cells were immortal due to her having multiple copies of the human papillomavirus 18, which is one of the most virulent strains. She also had syphilis and gonorrhea. And so it actually led to a lot of discoveries in the way of HPV research, cancer research, chemotherapy treatments, Down syndrome. They figured out that humans have 46 chromosomes instead of 48. They also, because there was such a demand for Henrietta's cells, that led to being able to produce mass mediums for propagating cells and shipping them efficiently. In addition, with this book, it put a face to a name that they didn't really have. They referred to her as Helen Lane and Helen Larson, and it was by accident that Henrietta Lacks was actually revealed. John Hopkins Hospital didn't actually want to release those records. And so, for the longest time, every scientist in the community knew of HeLa cells or had at least worked with them. But no one knew or thought to ask where they came from. And with John Hopkins not obtaining Henrietta's consent to take the cells, that information they didn't want released. And then whenever they found out about it and the beans got spilled, everyone started looking for Henrietta's family. And that threw Henrietta's family into the spotlight. And there was a lot of anger from her family because they didn't know that all of this had been done with Henrietta's cells. Her cells had been sent up into space, worked on in various conditions, and they didn't really understand what all was going on. And this also led to a lot of ethical issues in the medical field because informed consent was not really a practice until roughly late 60s, early 70s. And informed consent is letting the patient know of potential risk and what is going to happen with their tissues when it's removed. And a lot of the researches, such as like the Tuskegee Airmen trials, for instance, those were happening at the same time. And not a lot of people were happy about the results of that. And so when they had found out that HeLa cells had been injected into different subjects and not been informed about potential risk factors for being injected with those, there was a bit of an ethical uproar within the community, and a lot of laws had to be passed for the safety of the participants. And I learned that usually minorities and the poor were preyed upon for scientific research. There's an inequality there with education and finances, and they can't always agree to what they're doing because they don't understand it. There were a lot of African Americans who were subjected to research and trials that either did so out of financial necessity for their families or an inability to understand what their doctor was telling them. And there was a bit of a sociocultural norm between African American patients and their doctors. You just don't question the doctor. It led to a lot of misdiagnoses, malpractice, and even death in some cases. And the second thing I learned was that Henrietta Lacks' family was largely misinformed and taken advantage of when people learned who they were. And most of them have many health problems and no insurance, and they likely won't ever see any of the profits from HeLa cells. And because of Rebecca Skloot's involvement, however, Henrietta's kids and grandkids got to kind of see more of who she was as a person and what all her cells have done for humanity at large, honestly. And my overall impression of the book, I love how Rebecca Skloot wrote in different timelines. She would use different eras, and she'd incorporate them into all three parts of the book, and it would provide just an awesome flow of story. She gave a thorough look at all of the main characters, both on the scientific side as well as the family side of Henrietta Lacks, and kind of pulled all of their stories together. And she gave an update in the afterword of the book on all of the major players in the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks and where they were at the time of the book being published. And so finishing that up gave almost a sense of closure, and it provided an overall look at the woman behind Hella Cells and how we got this far.